Hi, everyone. Heather Williams here from the California AfterSchool Network for another Fireside Chat with Michael Funk from the California Department of Education Expanded Learning Division. And no special guest this week. We're just going to chat a little bit about the state budget updates, what's been going on. I know it's been a few weeks since we've had a Fireside Chat, and we keep scheduling them and trying to figure out what we're going to talk about and have more questions than answers, but and that's still the case. We still have a lot of questions, but we do have, some answers and some updates. So wanted to jump in and chat about that a little bit today. So Michael, I'll go ahead and kind of get us kicked off and start with kind of high level overview of what's been happening, and then turn it over to you to jump more into the weeds, and then we can chat about what's going on.
Sounds good, Heather. Hi, everyone.
So with that, I'll jump right in. Can sent out an email a week ago, last Friday, and there's been a few updates since then, but I know not everybody opens their emails or got a chance to read that. So we'll kind of high level go through that as well. So if you've been following along the journey since May, we know there's been, in May, the governor announced this new expanded learning program. There's been a lot of negotiations back and forth with the legislature about what that looks like, how much money would be spent this year, and all of those details. And so a lot of that has started to be hammered out. AB 128 was the original budget bill, and that was signed June 14th. And that was a big portion of the budget, but was not the complete budget. So the legislature and the governor have continued to be in negotiations and conversations to get the budget finalized. That budget appropriated $1 billion for this new program. And then what we've been talking about is the Budget Bill Junior, SB 129. And that was adopted by the legislature not too long ago, June 28th. And so that is sitting on the governor's desk waiting to be signed. And that put some more clarity, some more details around this new program. It did recommend, instead of just the $1 billion, going up to $1.7 billion and some change. And that had a few other details that also had, for example, the ACES rate and the daily rate, the ACES daily rate and the 21st century daily rate. So and I'm gonna say this slowly and carefully to make sure it's really clear, but basically ACES would be increased to $10.18 per student per day for the 21-22 school year and the 22-23 school year. And then 21st century would be bumped up to $10.18 as well. But it would, as of now, it's only proposed for the 21-22 school year. And so that's in the budget. It's not in effect yet. We're still waiting for the governor to sign it. But once the governor signs that bill, then that basically puts those new daily rates into place for the next year, next 2 years, depending on the program. But coming back to the new expanded learning program, what we were really waiting for was the education trailer bill. So trailer bills really provide a lot of the details about how the budget is implemented. And so the education trailer bill was released this week, AB 130, and it was actually approved. And as of yesterday, sent to the governor's desk. So that's also sitting on his desk, and that has a lot more details. And we'll get into those in a few minutes, but the bill does establish the Expanded Learning Opportunity Program. So we have ACES, we've got 21st Century Elementary Middle, we've got 21st Century Assets that serves high school programs, and now we have this new funding, the Expanded Learning Opportunities Program. We have that once the governor signs this and the other budget bill, like I said, 1.7 billion this school year, it is still intended to go up to $5 billion in the next few years. A lot of those details have to get worked out as well. And then for those of you that read through it, there's a lot of details, but we'll actually, Michael, I'll have you get into that in a few minutes. But it is for TK through 6 students, and it talks about unduplicated students and over 80%. And Michael, have you kind of dig into the weeds of that, but it also aligns to ACEs in a lot of ways. So it very clearly lays out, this program will be similar to ACEs in these particular sections. So Michael, I think at this point, I'll turn it over to you to kind of get into that. What are in the weeds of how this program, not too far in the weeds, but what we know so far, how this program will work, and some of the ways it would be aligned with the ACEs program.
Sure. Thank you, Heather. Thanks for the overview. I'll try to cover briefly, some of the high level things to give you a sense of the general direction and what's distinctive about this money from the existing programs, about the Expanded Learning Opportunities program. But you might be wondering, how could there be so many questions? I mean, aren't these people supposed to be in the know? Weren't we involved in? So I can tell you that for weeks upon weeks, we have been quietly asked to provide technical assistance and review language that was being proposed after the May revision was released from the governor's office. And I've lost track of how many versions of this trailer bill that I've seen in the language. And it has varied widely. At one point, it was a $1 billion program. And then when AB 128 was signed, it was a $3.3 billion program to every school in California. Now with this version, it's a 1.75 billion and some change, with an intent to go up. But I can tell you that the typical rhythm of this was to get an email. There's language, there's a document here, there's language. Is there anything here that you can't implement? Is there anything here that you think is a problem? Is there anything that should be added? And we'll need your feedback by the end of the day. And this was usually in the afternoon. So it was a lot of work quickly. And I'm happy to say that a lot of the things that we wanted to see are here. And so there are some new things. And sometimes the new things have some nuance. And right now, the Assembly and the Senate staff and Department of Finance are still incredibly swamped. They're still reviewing trailer bill language on things like transitional kindergarten and other important aspects. So it's not like people are waiting around for our questions. So we're getting answers where we can, and we intend to just be at it and find out more answers every day. And of course, a commitment to bring those back to you. And at some point, when things are finalized, our division, the Expanded Learning Division, will actually start to put out some things in writing. I know the Fireside chat is informative and helpful to hear the dialogue, but at some point you'll want things in writing. For now, what we're going to talk about is in AB 130. And if you want to Google that, just realize that there's AB 130s out there on the internet from other years. So you have to Google California AB 130 2021, and that should get you to the link. And then you go to section 52. And if you're looking at the PDF, it's page 189. I'm trying to help you here to get where you need to go. And then you might read language that may, if you're familiar with Ed Code, might make sense, and some of it might not. We'll do our best to break this down. But in short, this is a grant that is coming from Prop 98 funds, which is the set aside for public education, and is going to be allocated to school districts, local educational agencies, including charter schools, except for non-classroom based charters are excluded. Private schools are excluded. This goes through the LCAP, the Local Control Accountability Plan funding formula, or the LCFF, the Local Control Funding Formula. And so when you hear this word like LEAs that are eligible for 80, that have 80% unduplicated students will receive funding in the first year. The first thing to note is that this is not an assessment of school site by school site by school site. Those familiar with ACEs of 21st are used to, yeah, the grant goes to the school district or the LEA, but the funding is allocated this much for each particular school site. That's not the case here. The funding is allocated towards the LEA, and the LEA will establish a process locally to determine where the funds go within the LEA, within the district. And there are some provisions in Ed Code which require the LEA to target the most disadvantaged communities and schools within their LEA. So it's 80% of local educational agencies. If it's 80, not 80% of, it's if there's 80% of the students are unduplicated. What does that mean? So in the local control funding formula, a student that is experiencing homelessness in foster care or economically disadvantaged increases the revenue that comes to the district. When they're counting those students, a student that is homeless, a student that is one or all three of those is only counted once. That's why it's called unduplicated. So 80% means 80% of the students in that LEA are experiencing one or between one and three of those things. And that's the unduplicated count. And schools that have 80% unduplicated students will get the money in the first year. The formula is a little bit complex, but some of you might ask, well, then what's the daily rate? What is the formula? How does that go out? And the first thing to be mindful of in that discussion is there's no daily rate. It is a daily rate per student, and in Ed Code it says per unit. So it's a very simple formula. If, let's say for the ease of math, if an LEA has 1,000 students and there's 81% unduplicated students, so 81% of the students experience one or three of those things, then for every one of those students, the school district, the LEA will be given $1,170 for the year. And that has to provide services. The program has to be open every school day of the 175 and 30 days in addition, summertime, intersession, what have you. That equals 205 days of programming for that $1,170 per student. But the LEA is only required, while they have to offer the program to all unduplicated students, they only have to provide the program to 50%. That changes in the second year. It's the intent of the legislature to gradually increase that $1,170. But I'm trying to paint the picture, not so you can grasp all the minute details, but to paint the picture that this money goes out an allocation per student per year, and is based on the average daily attendance of K through sixth grade of that school times the percentage of unduplicated. So if that's 1,000 students in their average daily attendance, I think I said earlier, I misspoke. I said if there's 1,000 students in the LEA, they look at the average daily attendance and then times it by the percentage of unduplicated. So if that's 1,000 students in the average daily attendance and the unduplicated percentage is 81%, that's 810 times 1,170. So you get the picture of the general architecture. It shifts a bit in terms of who's supposed to be served and what's calculated in year two, and that detail is in the education code. one of the things that shifted and came out is farther down in the section 52. There's one line that says, an LEA can serve all students, including elementary, middle, and secondary students. So that can be confusing, but it just take it at face value. While the funding is determined on the average daily attendance of K through sixth grade, the bill says all students can be served. That's one of the things we need to get clarity on and get much more detail and guidance out to the field. There are several sections of the current ACES Ed Code that are referenced in the bill. And so in general, the required components of the program are essentially the same as the ACES program. And for example, an education and literacy element in which tutoring and homework assistance is provided in one of the following areas: language arts, mathematics, etc. The next section, an educational enrichment element that may include, but not be limited to, fine arts, career technical education, recreation, physical fitness. So those program elements that you're used to seeing as required of an ACES program are referenced as part of this bill. And there's going to be a requirement for an LEA to create a program plan and design that the department, our division, will actually create. And they have to do a new plan every 3 years, similar to the ACES program. And there's also a section in the Ed Code where they're encouraged to partner with community-based organizations and other institutions, including licensed childcare. There are some other elements of some of the required certifications. Staff requirements are essentially exactly the same as the ACES program. So the section of Ed Code that references the requirements for someone who's meeting the 20-to-1 ratio, that actually is referenced in this bill. The only change is this bill allows and encourages TK. So it says K through 6, that includes transitional kindergarten, and anything with kindergarten behind it. So in those programs, the staffing ratio is not 20-to-1, it is 10-to-1. I think I could go deeper there, Heather. I think that covers a broad stroke of just the idea of some of this. Take a look for yourself at some of the parts of the bill, and we'll be unpacking more of this as we go.
Yeah. And I think, some of the things that we know that are new and different, for example, is like ACES, we have very clear expectations around hours after school. This program's a lot more flexible. I think we've mentioned this before, right? It's 9 hours of instructional time and expanded learning time combined. And so a school could decide to run 1 hour before instructional time, have instructional time, and then 3 hours after, if that all adds up to 9 hours. Or if they need more time in the morning, they could run for 2 or 3 hours in the morning and only 1 hour after school. It's really a local decision. And there is the clear expectation to run the 30-day intersession days. So we know there are some nuances to this new program that are different than ACES. And there are also parts of ACES that are not specifically included in this program. Attendance, that one is a little bit fuzzy, and you can maybe go into details about that, or anything. We're probably getting close on time today, but maybe some of the major items that are not included or very different from ACES.
Yeah, and just you mentioned the 30 days, the program needs to be 9 hours on those days as well. It's just for reference. Well, I'm not going to try to go through an exhaustive list. Anything that is not specifically any section of Ed Code for ACES that's not referenced in this bill, that means those provisions do not apply to this funding. And we believe that in general, the rules of the local control funding formula and how a district implements those plans will be in play for this funding. What's an example? Many of you have been sending tweets to me about 8515, calling for us to change 8515. First of all, I want to say, I always appreciate advocacy and people communicating and tweeting and being active and civic engagement. That's great. So thank you for that. However, 8515 is in Ed code. So we can't just waive 8515 or for ACES in 21st century. It's in Ed code and it would have to be amended as part of Ed code for 8515. What does 8515 mean? If you don't know, it's that 85% of the grant is spent on direct services and 15% of the grant can be spent on a combination of indirect and administrative. What I can clearly tell you is the section of Ed code that requires 8515 to be applied to ACES and ACES programs is not referenced for the Expanded Learning Opportunities program. So 8515 doesn't apply, but every district will have some policy that's part of how they spend LCAP dollars that will apply. And we're still looking into what that means in the long term. That's one example. 8515 does not apply in that strict sense. And there's no grant reductions in this sense. There's no provision for a school to lose money if they don't meet a certain attendance target. If they don't meet the 50% in the first year, they could be given an audit finding in an audit process, but there is no attendance taking for the purpose of grant reductions. I think those are the two I'll mention now, Heather. And unless something comes to your mind that would be important to reference.
No, I think those are helpful ones. And you know, as we've talked about, there is a lot of nuance. We can get into the weeds of exactly what the formula looks like, and we'll be spending time digging into that. And as you said, the division will start to release FAQs once there's some more concrete details that can, you know, very specifically be stated. So I think that probably more or less wraps us up for today. I think my closing comments for today are, you know, one, please do go in and read through AB 130. I will say it's not a light read or an easy read, and it's the entire education trailer bill. And so there is a ton of content in there. So, you know, I recommend doing a search for expanded learning, and that'll get you to these references a lot faster. Also how Michael, the pages and sections he referenced. And I will note, you know, if you do that, you will likely find some other pieces of education code that refer to expanded learning. There's a whole chunk in here about the community schools grants, and they talk about the importance of expanded learning. So if you come across other sections, that there are other important references to expanded learning, but the section Michael referenced is the main section for the new program. And, you know, as we've talked about, a lot will be done at the LEA level. So it is a good time to start having conversations with your LEA about this program if you haven't already. Even with questions, a lot of outstanding questions and a lot of details to be worked out, starting those conversations today, instead of waiting until everything's 100% ironed out, will make it a lot easier to start to roll these programs out once we have more details. So yeah, and then on top of that, we should be celebrating. So I know we just spent some time talking about and getting really into the weeds, but we also really should be celebrating $1.75 billion in new funding. And this is not a one-time thing. This is really intended to be a permanent program in California. And so that is a huge investment in expanded learning. And so a lot to celebrate. And I think before, Michael, I give you the last word, I'll just say we won't have a fireside chat next week, but hopefully the week after that. And we'll continue to put out updates as we have information. So Michael, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Heather, and thank you for acknowledging that we've just spent a whole chat with the technical, and there is celebration. There's also purpose and aspiration. You know, we're not losing sight, and I'm certainly not losing sight, that while you have to understand the technical for implementation purposes, it's not a bad thing. And we don't want to dumb things down for people in this. We want to give you the details and trust that, yeah, you're actually interested in these details, and maybe taking notes, and maybe that'll prompt some of you to go look in the ed code. Just realize that, like, when you look at this section 52 and you go to the end of section 52 and you see, wait a minute, that only says 753,131,000. Well, the 1 billion's in a different bill. It's in the budget bill junior. And like that, there are things scattered all through 3 different bills that, so it's complicated, but in all of it, there's purpose and aspiration. And while we talk about new programs, and it really is an opportunity to do something incredibly transformative for our most vulnerable children, those children who are experiencing homelessness, in foster care, economically disadvantaged, ineligible for the free reduced price meals. How do we take this moment and coordinate, align, and leverage these resources with other resources and do something amazing for students and families? Something that's truly transformative, something that transforms the opportunities they have in their life. That's the big picture. I hold that every day. I try to hold that in every conversation. I do better on some days than others, but I certainly hold it every day. I know Heather does as well. And as we look to implement, let's keep the purpose and the aspiration of this opportunity in mind. And as always, that is leading with love. Thanks, Heather.
Thanks, Michael. Until next time.